Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of the Computing Research Association's Graduate School Application Preparation Workshop. These workshops are part of their undergraduate research to PhD program. Just so that everyone here knows, as has been mentioned before, these workshops are being recorded, so if anyone's uncomfortable with being on camera or speaking, please feel free to mute yourselves as well as turn off your cameras. So during this workshop, we'll be covering the topic of statement of purpose. And just to give everyone a brief overview of what we covered previously, here we're showing the objectives covered during the last session, which were that we identified the importance of different parts of the PhD application, as well as what elements can strengthen your application. And we also learned more about identifying strong letter of recommendation writers. And we started showing you all how to start anticipating how to manage the PhD application process. And you can also, if you did not have a chance to participate in last week's session, the recording is linked here on the slide. So you can watch it as well, and as well as the previous sessions. In addition to session 3, you can watch the first 2 as well. All of them are on YouTube. So for today's workshop, as I mentioned, we'll be covering the statement of purpose. And here is what we'll be covering our objectives for today. So we aim to understand what admissions committees look for when you're writing and applying to graduate school and writing your statements of purpose. And we also aim for you all to help you all write a strong statement of purpose as well as a personal history statement if these statements are requested separately. So before we talk anything about writing any type of statement, we'd like to make sure that you all understand what admissions committees are looking for in PhD applications. Oh my God. And this is what we'll be covering next. So it's important, as you all are completing applications now or in the future, to think about the type of research or technical experience that you have, as well as your interests. And here on this slide, we're showing 2 different lists. One from the perspective of yourself. So how well can you do each of the items listed here? How well can you show that you're excited and that you're motivated to start a research or a technical project, as well as showing them how well you can design new research projects or technical applications, and recognize what impact your project or technical applications might have. How well can you make connections between the different research areas in order to address a problem that you'd like to start to solve? And in terms of the first question, in terms of your research or technical experience, by that we're referring to what have you done and what can you do that's related to the type of research that you'd like to do in the time that you're a PhD student. By technical applications, that's referring to it's really broad in this context. Technical application can refer to anything ranging from like computerized software, so like a PC, for example, to something even more extreme, like, for example, surgical robots. Just to give you all a sense of what we mean by that term. So it's important that you all show admissions committees that you can do at least some of the following. and that showing them this can help to strengthen your applications. You need to show that you're able to work inter and independently. So by interdependently, that's referring to working with groups of people, whereas independently, it's more work completed by yourself. Um, and it's also important to show that you're competent enough to do these tasks as well as persistent when you're completing work, because sometimes you might not necessarily, you might say you'd like to do something, then you run into a problem that you're not able to solve. So you need to show that you're able to problem solve, that you're going to stick through and complete what you intend to do, and or change it along the way, depending on what ends up happening. So in terms of an example of collaborating with individuals, for example, let's say that you're a research assistant and you're scoring responses on a survey. In my case, I had several different research assistants that were helping me with scoring responses on a survey, and they were either scoring responses from all three conditions. That's what all of the research assistants had to do together. That would be an example of you're working with other people. You're able to complete one task as a group. Whereas doing something to take on a project by yourself, referring to the same example I was mentioning before, one of the research assistants for the project that I'm referring to, she scored one set of responses that only one condition in my study had to complete. So she took on that particular section of the project all by herself. In addition to also working with other research assistants to be able to score the rest of the participants in the remaining conditions of the project. So a lot of this is just one example to show you all that while you're doing one project, you can be doing both of these, you can be showing both of these skills at the same time using one project. In terms of an example of a goal and a timeline, you need to show that you're able to break a big project down into smaller goals that you're able to complete within in a timely fashion. So, for example, and you need to show this without as much guidance. So show that you're able to complete a task on time without being given as much guidance in terms of what steps are you going to do by when. So, for example, let's say that you're conducting a literature review. Someone just tells you, okay, we need you to do a literature review to study health implications of, I don't know, health implications of doing work on a computer versus doing work physically, for example. You'd need to be able to show, okay, I took this project, I was able to look up literature, I was able to read the literature, and I was then able to write a literature review in 2 months, for example, without somebody telling you what to do each and every day of that time frame. Just to give you all a sense of what these examples on the slide, what these bullets on the slide are referring to. You need to be able to show this. Don't just say you can do these things, but show them with examples that you're able to complete tasks like what's shown here.
Oh, just a quick add to that as well.
Sure.
Not This is also about not just breaking down tasks, which is a vital part of it, but also, to the previous slide and to the application materials we've discussed so far, right? You're sort of a big part of a standard statement of purpose, right? Is your purpose is a proposed research of some sort. So also just at a higher level that you are demonstrating an understanding of just general scale and scope of whatever that project is that you're proposing, you understand how long it's going to take to apply a particular method and to analyze that method. Sometimes, generally not in super minute detail within your statement of purpose, but you sort of there's a general sort of demonstration of that, like, oh, like if you, for example, were applying to a more social science and you said you were going to complete an ethnography in 3 months, right? That would maybe not be good because that would not demonstrate a good understanding of that method. However, if you're talking about surveys or you're talking about interviews, studies, or whatever, having a good understanding of whatever your method is, statistical analysis, having a good understanding of how long the kind of study that you're proposing takes, is really, really valuable, just as an overall. And then getting to what Karen said in terms of breaking it down.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely important. Each of these methods is going to take different amounts of time. So making sure that as you're communicating with advisors, as we've talked about before, that you're also um discussing details like that. How long do the methods that you use usually take? So back to the question of fit. We've talked about this several times, and we'd like to come back to it because fit is super important as you decide where to apply and in the end where you'd like to attend your graduate program. So here on this slide, we're showing a few questions in order to get everyone to start thinking more about what you bring to a program and what a program offers you. So in my case, for example, I heard about the concept of fit, but when I was applying, I was thinking more about it in terms of what did the program offer me? I wasn't necessarily thinking about it in terms of what I brought beyond just mentioning the different identities that I have. So being a Latina who is also blind and who is also a woman, I didn't really think, okay, well, what can I bring with these identities? I didn't realize at my time of applying how my department had so few people that had my characteristics and how even fewer underrepresented minorities, like compared to undergrad, there was already very few underrepresented minorities, and in grad school it was even less. And I didn't realize that, let alone in terms of intersectional identities, how few there would be and how overworked some underrepresented minorities are because of their many identities. So both what you bring and what the department contributes matters, because being comfortable there makes all of the difference in terms of your productivity and in terms of you being able to grow as much as you can within a really supportive community. And I say this in order for to avoid any surprises and to bring home why these types of workshops that we're doing now exist. Your research ideas really matter in terms of advancing what we may not necessarily know about a field. So with all of this background in mind, it's important that you all think about how you might answer the questions that are listed here. How might you build on what your program, the current people and the labs in your program? How will you build to what they already have? How will you contribute to collaborating and to the program's culture? How are you going to create new connections beyond what the connections that the program already has? And also think about how well the program can suit you. So in terms of their people or labs, how conducive are those environments to the research that you want to do? Or their equipment. Are you able to use the equipment that they have on hand to be able to conduct the research that you're interested in conducting? Are you able to connect with other departments or industry out or other organizations outside of your program? How relevant, how connected you is the program's culture to you as well?
Yeah, and real quick, I just want to just extra emphasize that this is we continue to come back to this because it is just the most important single part, I think, of the statement of purpose in particular. And this slide and the previous two slides, really should, I hope, highlight for you this isn't just a person about you as a person or just about your research. It is about how you and your research, are themselves already a good fit, and then how that research then fits very nicely into this department. Sometimes that's easy from a practical standpoint. Maybe you have a question you're trying to ask, and the program has this highly unique lab setup that is like one of the only places in the world that lets you ask that question with whatever phenomenon that you're or technology that you're studying. Sometimes it's harder, but it isn't just a personal or practical conundrum that you sort of have to convince them. You really do need to tell this whole story to uh, sort of help them come to the decision, right? Persuade them that you are the right person for the job, so to speak. And that not only that, the research that you want to do makes sense within their sort of auspices.
So it's also important that you keep in mind that your statement of purpose especially needs to convey characteristics about yourself, but not only the characteristics about you, but also you need to show how those characteristics relate to your research interests. So we'll be sharing more about both of these statements in the next couple slides. So starting with the first statement, the statement of purpose, or SOP, it really needs to, this slide is showing you what needs to be, what you need to be able to demonstrate in the statement of purpose specifically. So what it needs to demonstrate, you need to be able to show that what you're able to do and what you're able to contribute towards the academic program, and why the admissions committee needs to trust that what you're saying is true. So you need to show your academic and your professional background, as well as share your ability to conduct research and your potential to conduct new research. That's specific to the statement of purpose. The personal statement, or the personal history statement, in that particular statement, you're talking more about what kind of a person you are and what would make you an attractive member of that particular university's community. So it talks more about your goals, as well as about your passions and your resilience in life, because life happens, so you need to be able to show that you're able to bounce back. And it also provides evidence that you're able to handle any obstacles or challenges that might come up in grad school and beyond grad school. And it's also meant as a place to show the program of any obstacles that might have come up and how you overcame them, as opposed to having them guess. Talk about why the program and the institution is the right place for you, based off of what you've done so far and what you are planning on doing in the future. And in the case of a personal history statement is not always required. So in the case when it's not necessarily required, it would be valuable that you're explaining more about the chosen program and the institution as being the right place for you, depending on your experience and your future goals. And because some programs might only ask for one or the other, it's important that you don't just focus on your personal characteristics, but that you connect your personal characteristics to the research that you're interested in doing. Don't just focus it on describing yourself, but connect your personal experience to the research as well.
Sorry, I just want to make sure something's really clear. I think, Karen, you might have misspoke for a second. They won't ask for one or the other. They will always ask for SOP.
The statement, yeah, sorry, no, I did
Yeah.
misspeak. They'll
Yeah.
ask for
And
the
then
statement of purpose and not necessarily for the personal history statement.
Yeah.
So in the case that they only ask for the statement of purpose, don't just focus on your personal characteristics, but connect them to the research.
Yeah.
Thanks for
The
catching
priority
that.
on that one is always going to be the research, and then, a subplot might be is sort of your link, whereas the personal statement, the main plot is you. Yeah.
So here we're showing you some suggestions on different types of motivations that are worth considering as you decide whether or not to apply to PhD programs. And we'll also be talking about how you explain your motivations and why you have these motivations. So it's important that you share not only what motivates you, but also why these motivations motivate you. And the list that's on this slide, it's not necessarily exhaustive. These are just a couple of examples of some motivations that might push you toward applying to graduate school. So it's important to really think carefully about your why and about what open questions are you really wanting to answer, because that's really a lot of what a PhD is. It's taking on questions that, like we've mentioned before, it's answering questions that have not been answered. So what new questions are you wanting to answer and why? And Dan and I shared our motivations for wanting to attend graduate school in session 1. So for anyone who has not heard our motivations, you can feel free to do that. That's in the session 1 recording, starting from about 11 minutes and 40 seconds through about 14 minutes and 6 seconds. So feel free to go back to that session to hear a little bit about our motivations if you haven't heard them already. And when working with an advisor, it's also important that you include information about how well your interests and your advisor's interests align with one another. And in the end, your interests come first. So you really need to consider how your interests fit with the advisor's interests, like your potential advisor's interests. So as you review this slide, just think more about like, what are your interests, what excites you about those interests, and how can the advisor that you're interested in work, or advisors, because it doesn't necessarily just have to be one, how can they help you to develop those interests even more? If you're passionate about seeking out advanced positions in industry, for example, that's another, or in academia, that's another reason that you might want to consider a graduate program. Or in terms of research area, you might have motivations like not knowing something about a topic, and knowing that you don't know something is just as important, so that you can start figuring out, okay, what don't we know? How can I advance this particular field? Or what in your past research experience that you've done, what have you found that has led to new information that you're curious to find out more about based off of your previous interest? Make sure that your advisor that you're interested in working with is really committed to really exploring that topic with you, and make sure that you're also explaining how both of your experiences align to one another. Or going to resources. It might be that the resources that you're interested in using are hard to acquire, but the particular university has those resources. So that would be another motivation. And think about real world relevance. So will this question that you're particularly interested in answering be relevant in 3, 4, 5 years from now? And how will it contribute if the answer to that last question was yes? So in your statement of purpose, it's important that you state as specific a question as you can, while also remaining flexible. So you can frame your question as a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or as a problem that you'd like to continue solving. And so make sure that in the question that you're developing, you're talking about the who, the what, the why, and the how. So who are your participants that you're interested in? What are you interested in finding out more about? Why is that topic important? And how are you going to start answering that particular question? And where and when, if you're thinking about the 5 W's, where and when can be described last, as you talk more about why the particular campus is a good fit for you. And if you can also feel free to review session 2 on, we talked about areas, topics, and questions in that particular session. So feel free to go back to that session. The timestamps are 14 minutes and 45 seconds to about 19 minutes, to give you a review of what questions, areas, and topics are. And make sure that the question that you're developing is specific, but that it's also open to any, for example, another advisor that you're interested in working with. One person might be wanting to answer that question with one particular method, whereas another advisor at another university might be interested in answering it in a different method, using a different method. So it's
Or even
important.
two different, faculty within the same department, which can be a really big strength because that can help you round out your
Mhm.
letter. So like you can say like I'd like to work with this person or this person because they both bring these strengths. So that if you can essentially sell them on three people because that makes a whole committee, that helps you articulate fit very well. Can help you boost that case. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Three people, yeah, definitely. Like three people at the same university, or like my point was also just to say that you're going to be tailoring these statements to each university. So framing the question in a way that it can be answered using different methods, like that's in a way that you're open, can also be helpful as well. So going to the question, we talked about making as specific a question as you can. So now, how do you show that you're able to conduct the research and that your research question that you'd like to conduct is worth conducting? Make sure that you're showing the admissions committee the research experience that you have and how the research experience that you have informs the interest that you're wanting to learn more about, the question or the problem that you're trying to solve. Make sure that you're able to show what skills you've learned before and how you're able to apply these skills toward answering your new question, as well as making sure that you're able to use your potential advisor's expertise in order to be able to inform that question. And just be aware, another point to keep in mind with as you develop your question is that you need to be aware that the question is not set in stone. How and what you say in a statement of purpose is flexible, as long as you're being clear on your question that you're interested in and on how being at that particular university can help you to start answering it and how it can help you to grow your knowledge. So it's important that you come with a research question in mind in a particular area for a particular topic, and make sure that you're willing to start answering that question, but just know that the exact question would probably change over time. It's not set in stone. It's not something that you come in, you apply to, and you have to stick with that. It's going to change over time. And it's important, for example, that you're also showing them skills like that you're able to analyze information, that you're able to problem solve. That's just as valuable. And you'll be a lot more convincing to the admissions committee if you can show them that you have these types of skills in order to start answering that question, that you have the ability to think critically, in order to show them that you not only have a well thought out question, but that you're also aware of what steps you're needing to take in order to start addressing that particular question. And ideally, you'll come with an advisor or more as well, and make sure that you're asking your potential advisor who else from that particular university they suggest that you work with. And we keep mentioning advisors because another important thing to note about them is that coming in, the sooner you have a good working relationship with advisor, one or more advisors, the better, because the longer that relationship takes to establish, the harder it is to make sure that you're successful. You're less likely to succeed if you take a long time finding a research advisor, because that gives you less time to dedicate toward conducting your particular research. So to give you all a better sense of where Dan and I were when we started our PhDs, we'd like to take a moment to share what we thought of researching at the start of our programs. So in the case where the way that we frame the slide is we're talking about the research areas that we were interested in, the question that we were interested in answering, and the topic that we were interested in addressing. So in my case, I was really interested in understanding more about student learning. That was my area, broadly speaking. The topic that I was interested in understanding within the field of student learning was reading comprehension. And so the question that I made was, how does the format in which you're reading information, whether it be reading it visually in print, in braille with your fingers, or using audio, how do those affect your ability to comprehend in those individuals who are blind as compared to those who have low vision? Was the question I started with. It didn't end up that way though. Dan?
Yeah, so I listed two areas because essentially they mean the same thing depending on whether you're based that well, they don't exactly, but they mean largely the same thing depending on whether you're based in a social science department like I was prior to my PhD or a computing program like I was in my PhD. So yeah, so I was broadly interested in the ways that we interact with technology, particularly digital and virtual technology. And the sort of topic that was sort of increasingly a part of my interest was the ways that we sort of curate and sort of, manage our identity through digital systems uh, in various forms. And I should have, I have two questions as well because I should have swapped these. The one in the parentheses is the question that I essentially wrote my SOP around. The one that's not in the parentheses is what I kind of actually ended up doing. And that's sort of to reiterate something Karen said on the previous slide, which is that these are not, your SOP is not a set in stone. It's not a contract. It is meant, it is a lot of people do their project on their SOP, but a lot of people don't. It's probably 50-50. I don't have numbers. Um, but its value isn't just in what that project is. It's also largely just a demonstration that you can identify a problem within, the domain, the area, and that you can sort of demonstrate a knowledge of how you would study that. And whether or not you do largely depends on what happens in the first year or two, in the additional literature you read, the discussions you have with your advisor, and it's sort of expected that that may or may not happen. So it's really, how much they really need that project to happen is often secondary to just, oh, wow, this person can put this all stuff together, because actually that's hard to do for a lot of folks at this stage. So yeah, so I was interested in looking at the concept of third culture individuals, which comes from social science, and applying that to folks who sort of spent large portions of their formative years online, which is an increasingly large part of our population. I still haven't done that research. It's been more than 10 years since I said I would. I have not done it yet.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
My project, I mean, I did memory work, which is related to learning, but no, nothing about reading comprehension. So, just to make this a little bit more interactive, we'd like to give you all some time to reflect. So please, if you all could take a moment to answer the questions that are listed on the slide. So what research topic are you interested in learning more about? And what question would you like to start answering about that particular topic? What is one step that you can take in order to start to grow that interest even more? So if you all take a moment to think through your answers to those questions, then we would be happy to take some of your responses either in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and share, that works as well.
Yeah, we're happy to essentially help you workshop. And for those of you who have been in previous sessions, and you might be thinking like, oh, they asked us something like this, in a previous session. Um, that's just in part because when you're in a PhD, answering questions to the effect of what is your research and why will feel like 50% of your life. It's good to start practicing, because everything in your application goes back to what is the research you're trying to convince the program to invest in you to do. Um, so yeah, the more you think about it and sort of go through this process, and if you can get feedback. Yeah, Megan dropped in the
Megan
chat,
said.
the evolution of education, learning at scale with AI systems. Interesting. Yeah. Um, do you want to tell us like maybe how you would want to study that topic? It's a really timely topic. Or maybe like what your next step would be to study it, or hopefully. And if you're not sure, you can say that too, and we can maybe help
Mm-hmm.
you think about how to start answering that question.
Like, who are you interested in studying evolution with? Oh, no
Uh,
worries about
so
your
there already
audio.
somewhere. That's okay. So if
Oh my
you
God.
can either drop in chat or we can start to maybe think about like other direct like some of the ways that you can sort of get specific.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we
Yeah, hi,
can.
we can.
Okay.
Welcome.
Awesome. Yeah, so I was thinking about in terms of like what question. Uh I think it would be interesting to ask what are the differences in outcomes from um AI-based learning versus in-person learning versus hybrids of both, and
Sure.
how it impacts soft skill development. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a broad question, I feel. So
Yeah,
I don't know how to package it um for an SOP. I can
right.
tell about like one of the things we got um funding to look at was like, okay, if students are learning coding from an interface, how does that affect their ability? Versus learning in person.
So, yeah, I mean it's definitely a timely topic, and I think while this is not my like absolute area of expertise, I can't avoid it because I teach, and we are constantly this grappling with with problems related to this, right? And I also am a bit resistant to a lot of the AI stuff, but actually, what I would say is at least as of the last time I looked, which wasn't terribly long ago, to the value of your question and something that you actually said yourself is that there's actually kind of not as many studies out there as you might think about sort of like actually what are the outcomes, right? Like empirical
Mm-hmm.
observations of like, is it better? Certainly OpenAI would like us to believe that it is. Um, Certainly they're spending a lot of money to sort of tell that story, but like has anyone sat down and put some students without AI next to some students with AI and actually observed what those outcomes are? Um, so that's actually, there was a study that just came out a couple weeks ago that I came across that was doing a similar sort of study within sort of the tech sector with sort of entry-level programmers and experienced programmers to see how it sort of improves or influences the sort of workflow and productivity. And some of the findings were surprising, particularly sort of as it compared to sort of more experienced versus entry level, which I think is somewhat relevant to what you're saying. Um, but yeah, I mean, like that's the technology that we currently call AI is not terribly new, but we are applying it suddenly in a lot of new ways. But despite how ubiquitous it's becoming, you can probably find a really strong argument for a lack of empirical observation for its actual impact and the outcomes that it can produce or can't produce in a variety of educational contexts. And to answer your question about how you might start framing that, it's really just it's pick a context hopefully one you're interested in, but I don't want you to feel anxiety about like wanting one necessarily like, oh, K through 12 or higher education, or even more specifically within computing classrooms or et cetera, because at a certain level, again, your SOP is more of a demonstration of your ability to sort of design at a basic level a project that would happen within that context. Um, I hope that is helpful. It was a
Yeah,
longer answer than I expected.
that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And just to quickly add to what Dan mentioned before getting to the other responses in the chat, I'd also say try to keep your question. One way of being specific is to be simple. So right now it was mentioned like soft skills, AI, learning, like that's already three variables right there.
Yeah.
So maybe just picking one, tops two of them, and trying to
Or
develop that more with like literature to back up what you're saying. And if there's no literature, then saying that there's limited information out there. Here's the one or two papers that I found on that particular topic.
You can either
Um,
limit the variables or just limit the context. Either one
or
can
yeah,
be and simple. I've had students who get mad at me because I tell them to write more simply, and actually being simple is hard. It's much more difficult than being complex. But simple is clearer. So don't take it as an insult if somebody says your research, explain your research more simply or identify a simpler project, because actually it's often more difficult.
Thanks.
uh,
Thanks
oh,
again.
Go ahead.
I thought someone was gonna say something.
Oh,
I was just gonna read what Pushpita put in the chat, and feel
yeah.
free to correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Um, they're interested in understanding more about the effect of, okay, cool. They're interested in let me go back to the message. I already lost it.
I can read it, I
They're
got it.
Oh, okay.
AR learning systems, HCI question, how can children learn computational thinking through different AR systems? My first step can be learning what such systems exist already and figuring out a limitation or novel approach that I can build and work with. Yeah, absolutely. And that would be your first step. My only
Mm-hmm.
suggestion would be uh, if you can do a little bit of that before you, as part of your SOP, to be like, I've already sort of started to look at like this system or this system, not to necessarily nail down like it's definitely going to be this system, but you can say something to the effect of like a preliminary review suggests that, it's probably going to be one of these or this, and then sort of thinking through how, you sort of how you would find the next step over the next year or something like that. But yeah, I think that that's really good. Um,
And just another quick thing about specifics. What age are these children? Are they like
yeah,
preschool age or are they third graders? Because that's
yep,
going to be different
yeah,
depending on the age. The design would be different. So just so that you can, I keep tearing this apart just so that you realize how much more specific you can be,
yeah.
because I really struggled with that. I'm not gonna lie when
And
I was
and
doing this research.
that's another good point too, because also if you are looking at children, demonstrate that you've thought about the ethical implications of doing research with children. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to go into great detail, but if you're understanding the fact that there are risks involved with the research from a sort of very pragmatic standpoint, that can really sort of um, help your case that you're like, oh, they already know about like internal review boards, which maybe you don't, but if you now you do, you can look them up. If you understand sort of the ways that risk assessment happens for research and institutions, then uh, that can also help. I wanted to say too, just keeping an eye on the clock,
Yeah,
I can respond to Harper quickly, but I think, or maybe actually really keeping an eye on the clock. Sorry, Harper and Anthony, maybe we'll leave your questions till the end, but I'm happy to stay after for a few
same.
minutes to
Yeah, I
chat.
was gonna say the same thing, but okay. Let me go back.
Oh, I'm on the next. It's my slide next. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, so we've largely discussed research so far. However, ultimately, an SOP is just as much about you, as we were kind of saying before, and why you are the right person for the job of doing that research. So it's important to sort of continue to refine and get specific with your research. Um, uh, but yeah, you guys start thinking about you. And we've taken what might often be presented as more sort of general questions about why you might want a PhD on this slide, for example, but made them about this PhD. And the reason we sort of worded it that way is that some of your answers may be general, such as the motivations we discussed a few slides back. We want to encourage you to remember but beyond that sort of general motivation, maybe there's a problem that exists in the world, or you have past experiences that sort of make you concerned about it. Again, just to really, really beat a dead horse, you are arguing that that fit in your SOP, right? You have to also remember that your audience isn't general. And so your arguments shouldn't be general either, right? Your audience are the individuals representing a specific program with specific people that you are sort of trying to convince to fund you and this research, right? Why should they hire you specifically for that job? Of conducting research like what you're explaining. So being able to answer questions like these within the context of that PhD program can really help you demonstrate that you're ready to grow past student and sort of knowledge consumer to professional knowledge producer. Next slide, please. Yeah, your SOP needs to tell a story to do this, right? So stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. Just like any story, you need to begin by setting the context, right? What are your personal motivations or the motivation behind the specific research that you want to do? What is the specific research that you want to do? What are some of the questions you hope to explore? All the stuff that we've just been talking about. The middle is the sort of meat of the story, as you might say, right? How it all happened or is going to potentially happen. What are some of the examples of experiences that you have that demonstrate your aptitude for this project? You remember your CV has a list, so you need to, as Karen said earlier, you need to go beyond just telling them, right? You need to show them. She gave some examples earlier, but you need to paint scenes that illustrate your experience or skill acquisition in the area. So it's not just like I did a research project on topic, right? It's in a previous project, I relied on particular method to find a particular outcome and had a specific that outcome had a specific impact or meaning even that I thought was important for reasons, right? It's going to vary based on what you're writing about. And this is also where you likely want to address any apparent issues with your CV or other materials. Though, if you are submitting a personal history statement, much of that can go there instead. But if you only have the SOP, you do sort of need to try to find space to sort of address some of that stuff. If, like me, for example, there's some things on your CV or in your other materials that maybe is less competitive looking. But by the end, you should be trying to link your story to the program in as specific terms as possible. This includes why you hope to work with that specific faculty on, the details of the project that you've hopefully outlined by the end as well, and why you want to work with those people or those specific labs and why. Again, I keep going back to why because it might be the most important part. Karen sort of spoke to this earlier. You are supporting your argument for fit and demonstrating your ability to analyze the department and its resources for alignment with your research. And that's a key skill for any researcher. Next slide, please. So this is, I tried to simplify this as much as possible. We kind of went back and forth on this, but this is an attempt to visualize the basic short structure of a statement of purpose. It'll likely have more than 4 paragraphs. This just shows sort of some example paragraphs. Um, I highlighted the intro paragraph in color because it's arguably the most important paragraph. It will ideally tell the committee, right, who's reading it or any sort of reader, much of what they should expect within the rest of the statement, right? You're sort of making your thesis is that like, I'm going to do this project and I'm great for reasons, and then you might have paragraphs that sort of then outline and expand on those reasons, to provide evidence for those reasons, right? So you should be aware that that first paragraph will likely set their expectations. Or if you want to look at it a bit more positively or constructively, it's the opportunity to allow you to set their expectations based on what you sort of are setting up. And then you might have example paragraphs about your research experience, other forms of experience, either professional or successes, challenges. You may even have a paragraph that just sort of cleanly sort of illustrates this is the project and this is how I want to do it. And then you sort of wrap up again, linking all of the stuff together to your potential advisors, the program, etc. All right, next slide. So, it writing a statement of purpose can be really difficult. It at least for me, it was one of the hardest things that for me it was very, very challenging. It's really I struggled. A lot of us struggle to sort of really talk in detail about ourselves and sort of what we've done and these sorts of things. That can be really difficult, and it can also take more time to do than you expect for that reason, and also because you can't treat this like an assignment in your undergrad that you waited till the night before to submit. You have to do multiple drafts. And in fact, I would even suggest if you're submitting to multiple schools, actually save your first choice to to write it for a different school first, because inevitably each version you're going to write is better. I remember being so
That's true.
frustrated because I did one of my first 2 years, I did the school that I wanted the most. I did that first because I thought, oh, I'll use all my energy on that one, and then I'll my derivative drafts will go to other schools or secondaries. But actually, over by the time I did my third year, I realized no, it's actually the opposite. Go the opposite because all those revisions are just improving. You just notice more things that you can write better. So start with actually, I would even, depending on how many schools you're doing, start with a less priority school, write it for that. And then as you start to tailor it to the new schools, save your number one school for like your third or fourth or even later school that if you're submitting to that many, because it'll just be a better statement of purpose. Use all kinds of writing resources. Pay attention to limits. 1200, 1500 are common word limits. Sometimes they won't tell you a word limit, in which case keep it under 2 pages just to be safe. And again, just I cannot say enough. Get feedback from others, revise and iterate.
And a quick thing, in terms of paragraph order, going back to like the intro being the most important, because it's so important, I'd really suggest writing it last. That's what writers do. Sometimes the order in which we read information, so you usually read the intro first when you're reading stuff, but when you're writing it, that tends to be the last thing you write. Because by that point, you already have the body paragraphs developed more, and you can use those to inform what you say in the intro to guide the reader more.
Or at the very minimum, if you write your intro first, make sure you go back and revise it. Even, yeah, because different people have different writing styles. I agree that I tend to write elements of my introductory sections, depending on what I'm writing. I tend to write a lot of that stuff last, but I try to always at least have a really strong thesis statement, right? In this case, in an SOP, the statement is, I want to do this research for this reason at this place, right? Or I want to do this research at this place for this reason, right? And I probably wouldn't keep that thesis in the final version. I'd revise it, but that helps me remember, oh, what's my point? Like everything has to go back to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about writing next week, because as it says at the bottom, right, we're going to be doing we're having opportunities for sort of peer feedback and workshopping within next session. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the meeting. Because we still need to, yeah, I think Karen, you're gonna have to really cut the personal history statement stuff really short.
Yeah,
Here are some other details really quickly that I won't really go over because we don't have time. But you can find these on the video once it gets posted. Yeah. Another one I have listed here is current PhD students. I strongly encourage you, if you can, to reach out to current PhD students, especially in departments you're really interested in. Often they will share their materials. This is a context where plagiarism isn't really much of a concern, because if you're just offering the same project that a current PhD student already is doing, they're not going to accept you. So plagiarism is not really ever going to work in this context. Neither is AI, for that matter, we were talking about earlier, because it's going to have a really hard time articulating fit in a meaningful way, just because of the basic limitations of the technology. All right, all done.
That's good. So another statement that you might need to write is, it's called a personal history statement. It has a lot of different names, but for this context, I'll refer to it as personal history statement. And I'll let Julia answer the question about the workshop recordings. The names can vary, as I was mentioning, and in general, the personal history statements ask about your background and about how your background influences your research interests. And here there's just, we're going to go briefly into the steps of writing one of these. So in addition to the topics that are shown on the slide, I'm going to read briefly a sample prompt of a personal history statement that I was asked to write when I applied to graduate school. And if you can go into the content on the slide, it mentions extracurricular activities. The more you can tie extracurricular activities to your research interests within your personal history statements, the better. So going to the prompt, the essay that is meant to assist admissions committees and fellowship committees in order to evaluate your background and to evaluate your motivation for graduate study. So the personal history statement needs to describe how your personal background informs your decision to pursue a graduate degree, and make sure that you address certain things like any familial, cultural, economic, or educational or social experiences or opportunities that are relevant to your academic journey, as well as challenges that you faced and how you overcame them, how you addressed them, as Dan and I mentioned before. How did employment when you were working as an undergraduate, if you worked as an undergraduate, how did that affect your interests as well? And how your perspectives or activities, how do they contribute to your social and cultural diversity? Or how have you become sensitive to other people's experiences from underrepresented groups as a result of participating in these activities? So this slide is just showing a sample of my concluding paragraph. This is the paragraph I wrote for a personal history statement that I submitted to University of California, Irvine. Most of the statement focused on my blindness as well as my ethnicity and how both of those informed my academic, social, and extracurricular experiences. Since this paragraph is the conclusion, but in the case of reading the full essay, the audience already knew my demographic characteristics. They already knew how I use them to inform myself, to work with other students around me who are blind, as well as with parents of individuals who are blind, and how I faced and overcame the challenges that came my way. And I also spoke about, in the conclusion, I focused it around what I offered University of California, Irvine, and what University of California, Irvine offered me. So really tailoring that last paragraph to the particular campus that you're planning on attending. So regarding a structure of a personal history statement, when you're starting out, make sure that you're mentioning the reason or the motivation behind your PhD and connecting your personal motivations to that particular research interest. And the more connected your motivation is to the research, the better. In the middle, focus more on your prior research and your research relevant experiences, as well as any discrepancies or any like rough patches that you faced, how you overcame them. That might also be in the statement of purpose if no personal history statement is required. And by the end, make sure that you're customizing the text to at least one paragraph of it to why the department or the particular program and faculty within that program interest you as well.
Yeah. Before I get into this really quick, I would also just say, just to sort of continue the theme of sharing really quickly, my personal statement, for example, no, you can go. That's fine. It's not. There's
Oh.
nothing on there that's helping. My personal statement had to focus very heavily on making up for shortcomings. I had to explain why it took me 10 years to get a bachelor's degree and why at certain points in that 10 years, my grades weren't so good, right? Because if they just had my CV and my transcripts, those were not a compelling case to accept me to a PhD. Um, and so I had to really sort of speak for that journey and why, what challenges prevented me from finishing a four-year degree in 4 years as opposed to 10, and a lot of other things like that. Um, okay, so this one is pretty common tips for effective writing, as it says. They are common in that they don't just apply to standard statements of purpose or personal history statements. Really sort of you can find these most anywhere, but we've included them just for sort of convenience. I'm not going to go through all of them in part because we really are almost out of time, and the next slide is much more important in a lot of ways. However, what it really boils down to is, you know, really telling a good story, emphasizing your strengths, but not ignoring your weaknesses or taking them out. You have to sort of address them, particularly if they're visible in other materials. They will notice them. So just sort of face them head on. Iterate, revise, get feedback. Editing is the strongest thing you can do as a writer, because your second and third and fourth drafts will be exponentially better than your first one every time. Next slide. And then, yeah, so just to wrap it up for next week, this is an example statement of purpose prompt that I stole from I logged into several university things, and this is or we did actually, and this is a sample prompt. And if you're coming next week, we strongly encourage you to come with 3 sentences even that sort of explain some of the stuff we've said today, right? Why the research you want to do matters to you and also potentially society. Why are you such a good fit for that research? both from a capacity, like a motivation standpoint, but also sort of a proficiency standpoint, and why your planned research and the institution to which you are hoping to apply are good fits for each other. So think about those things. If you can come with even 3 sentences attempting to answer those questions, which require more than 3 sentences to answer, but you don't have to, you can flesh that out, the evidence for it in your purpose. But yeah, with that, we're out of time. So we'll call it. We'll stick around to answer some questions that have been dropped in the chat, but that is the end of the workshop. And hopefully we'll see you next week. If you're not sticking around to chat.
And please feel free to share your feedback as well.
Yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. You will be asked when you leave the Zoom.